there, and welcome back to Gamecock Scoop Podcast. Wow, you can tell it's been a minute since I did this. To the GamecockScoop.com podcast, the official podcast of GamecockScoop.com on Rivals. I'm Caleb, joined by Alan, wishing you a happy holidays. Hope you're still eating all those Christmas leftovers this morning and playing with your new toys or whatever it is that you're doing. I am currently standing in a room with a bunch of crap around me. Not the most ideal podcasting
Any new
scenario, but
any new toys?
no new toys. We're gonna probably take a trip together to like Aspen in a couple months. So that's our gift to each other in my family. But um, what about you? Anything fun?
Uh, Not much. I didn't get home this year. We'll maybe grab something on the back end of the bowl trip. Just I'm very much a practical gift guy. Like, what can I actually use? Like that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Which is a very boring adult answer, but
No,
yeah,
same. Actually, we're visiting the in-laws, and I got some like wool socks, and I'm really stoked about them. So
yeah.
I take
I
that
feel that.
back. Yeah, I am for the functionality.
Yeah.
So the reason that I guess you didn't make it home, right? We have a bowl matchup coming up here in about 5 days. We're going to preview a
Yep.
little bit of that today. We're also going to catch you up on the portal news since the last time we spoke, which is actually quite a bit of stuff. If I'm looking at the transfer tracker of folks that have left from South Carolina, I don't think there's a ton to add since we last spoke,
I don't
except
think there's any.
for, well, the only thing that I would add is South Carolina picked up a linebacker, the top linebacker in the portal, and Andrew Jones out of Grambling. And he made a last second pivot. Well, beyond last second, he committed to South Carolina for like 2 days and then pivoted to Ole Miss. Part of that could be the Ole Miss portal machine, which tends to work pretty well every offseason. But also keep in mind he is from Louisiana. It is a little bit closer as far as if family wants to see him play and stuff like that too. If I'm going to be not cynical about whatever's going on with Lane Kiffin and all of them over there. South Carolina has picked up a couple other names since then, including a linebacker, Sean Murphy, out of Florida State. Um, Highly rated guy, hasn't played a ton yet. That's kind of been the theme of this portal cycle at this point. And then an even bigger, well, before we get that, they also added offensive lineman Rodney Newsom Jr. out of Western Kentucky. That is someone who's
Who's played
contributed
a
some,
lot? Yeah.
yeah, exactly, some college snaps. So far in the O line room, I feel like they've kind of done what they needed to do. They added two guys that have played a lot of college snaps in Rodney Newsom Jr. and Nick Sharp out of Wake Forest. And then everyone else, Gabriel Brownlow Dindy, defensive lineman out of Texas A&M, Jalen Brown, defensive end out of Missouri, uh, the linebacker that I just mentioned out of Florida State, and then former five-star quarterback Aaron Noland out of Ohio State are all guys that you're like happy to get. Were highly rated out of high school. They haven't necessarily had an opportunity to fully show it at the college level, but you feel like it's great. It's a great depth move. And that if you can kind of convince them to stick around for more than 1 year, that it could really pay dividends in the long term. What did you think of the Nolan move? I think that that's kind of what everyone would like us to start with. He's a former five-star on Rivals, 6.1 five-star, number 3 overall quarterback in the 2024 class. Right? Hold on. Yeah,
Yep.
2024
That's right.
class. Number 31 overall recruit, regardless of position in the 2024 class. But obviously hasn't had a ton going on at Ohio State. They obviously have a pretty deep quarterback room themselves. What do you make of this move with, Lenore Sellers obviously being the presumed starter going into next year? I don't think that they made this move to give Noland a shot to to knock him off his perch. Do you?
No, I don't. I think you have two ways this could play out. I think there's the very easy path and if you're I don't want to say easy, but if you're the coaching staff and you're trying to plan this out and you're thinking, okay, Sellers was really, really good down the stretch, you would have to imagine, you'd hope he'd have a big year again next year. He'd be in the national conversation, the Heisman, and he'd be draft eligible after next year. And all that stuff happens, you have to plan for maybe losing Lenore Sellers after next season. And then you have a guy in Noland who I guess he can't redshirt twice, but he'd still have 3 years of eligibility after this next season. He's a 5-star, highly rated, all of that. I think the flip side of that, and where I would have the question, and I'm not saying you plan for this because you have to kind of always plan for the worst case scenario or losing guys when you're a coach, but what if Lenoris is good, not great next year? What if he's really good, but he doesn't feel like he's NFL ready and he wants to come back in 26? Is Aaron Nolan going to sit for 2 years and that makes it 3 total to get into the portal again next offseason? Like you're kind of making the bet that with this that he's your quarterback, or at least he's in the competition in 2026, I think. And I'm not quite sure where you go from there if, again, let's say Sellers is good but not NFL first round good next season.
Yeah, I think it might almost be the risk of worth the risk of threading that needle though, because you also get the added benefit this coming season. If Lenore Sellers were to miss any
Yep.
time due to injury, you feel like you have a pretty solid backup behind him. The only person that I think is probably this isn't coming from any like inside knowledge. I haven't spoken with him or anything, but that is maybe scratching their head a little bit is like Dante Reno, who just signed a Garnet Trust deal for this year. We kind of speculated whether or not he would look around. Seems like he didn't. And then you kind of bring in someone that's the same class as him that you would presume is maybe ahead of him in the pecking order. But, you know, who knows? Maybe Dante, once they get on campus, the star ratings don't matter so much, right? So who knows there? But I do think that that's a little interesting to kind of keep an eye on. Any of these other portal ads that got you excited, got you intrigued, and then I think we should kind of transition to what still needs to happen.
Yeah, I would pair the 2 offensive line commits just in terms of intrigue, just because it's, we talked about, again, we talked 2 paths. They can do what they did last year and try to get some more experienced guys, or you can just say it's time. Let's go to a Blake Franks, a Marquis Anderson, a Ryan Brubaker, those guys. I think it's probably the right thing to get guys who have played snaps. I mean, I think Sharp and Newsome both could be plug and play guys just because of their experience. But what does that do for the rest of your offensive line room? What does that do for a guy like Blake Franks or Marquis Anderson or Ryan Brubaker? I mean, they can't. I know you need depth, but they can't all play. And also, I'm curious about center. This is very specific, but you're going to lose Vershawn Lee. I'm not sure if any of those younger guys would be ready to step right into center. I know Newsome did it a little bit at Western Kentucky, but it wasn't his primary. I'm kind of curious what the long-term plan is at center, because it's one thing to plug and play at guard. It's a little harder to do that at center.
Yeah, I think you might still be targeting it, or yeah, maybe trying to cross train one of the young guys over there. But it wouldn't surprise me if they still try to target one out of the portal, a la like a Nick Gargiulio or something like that if they can find it. One other name I forgot to add. We also South Carolina also added Kentucky tight end Jordan Dingle. I think that's a pretty big ad. He's put up 615 yards on 43 receptions and 4 touchdowns across 4 seasons. Kind of took a step back this past year, but you could also argue that the entire Kentucky offense took a step back. But I do think that fills in a nice role where you're losing Joshua Simon. Maybe he's not quite to that athletic ability, but he's up there. He's a pass catching guy for sure. And then you still have Michael Smith on the roster. So I thought that was a pretty important ad. And then on defense, I think both of those guys have intriguing upside. Brownlow Dindy, the former 4-star defensive tackle, that's from Texas A&M, and then the FSU linebacker whose name is escaping me right now. Sean Murphy. I think both of those names are intriguing ads. You obviously just need depth at both of those positions. You need bodies there. And if you're going to take a chance on someone, maybe it's those highly rated guys that just haven't had a chance to break through at their respective schools that you would assume have a little bit of depth of their own there in front of them. So maybe it's not necessarily a talent issue as much as it's just it wasn't their time yet.
Yeah, and I think you talk about transitioning to what they still need. Yeah, it's more bodies, it's more depth at linebacker and defensive tackle. I think you've made a good start in both camps, but we all know what they're losing. I will say though, we haven't talked about this yet. The NCAA ruling that's giving players who ran out of eligibility in 24 but came from JUCOs their extra season back. I don't know if he wants to use it. I don't know if he wants to try his hand at the NFL. He's going to be 25 years old when next season starts. He might just want to move on. But Bam Martin Scott can come back next year now, and that wasn't true last time we were on this podcast. I don't know. I don't know what he's thinking. I would imagine that'd be a topic in Orlando, but that does, if he wants to come back and be a 25-year-old super senior linebacker, that does change your calculus a little bit.
Yeah, at least we think so. Because reading
Yeah,
through
that's true.
the exact wording, the NCAA never makes anything super straightforward. So it's possible that they could interpret certain like it on a case by case basis. So then it'll just somewhat depend on whether he wants to be there, and then somewhat depend on whether the NCAA rules that applies to this particular ruling. But either way, there's a window potentially for Bam Martin Scott to return. I think that would be huge. As far as other portal positions, I think, yeah, you're still trying to load up as many defensive linemen as you can. I think it's good to get the defensive end out of Missouri that they got. But you could probably still use another edge rusher, and then definitely more on the interior. Defensive back, you probably feel pretty good about where you're at. It's possible they could end up landing one more there. I know they were feeling pretty good about where they were. Sorry, great audio, with Miles Norwood out of Ball State. And he was supposed to announce his decision yesterday, but then he went to Twitter and said there was some sort of family something. So you wonder, I mean, they're all together there on Christmas. You wonder if maybe mom or dad or somebody is kind of having him rethink where he ends up there. So who knows how that's going to play out, but wouldn't surprise me if they add one more, especially outside corner, just to give you a little depth behind Bakari Swain and Judge Collier, who I think you like, but that's a pretty thin room. Yeah, I mean, it seems like they obviously were targeting running back if it was a true difference maker. They had Justice Haynes on campus last week, but he ended up at Michigan. I think they feel pretty good about their running back room, but if there was like an obvious former 4 or 5 star guy like that wants to come here, then you probably listen, and maybe another wide receiver. But yeah, I mean, it seems to me, and tell me if you agree with this, it seems to me that they've taken a little bit of an approach that they like their core, like they like what they got, and they're just trying to make sure that they have injury insurance for most of these positions.
Yeah, and that was something we talked about last year, where it's, when you're building out these collectives in modern college football, you're trying to figure out how you want to allocate your dollars and anything like that. They've taken the retention option. And they did it last year too, keeping a lot of those defensive guys we talked about this year, making sure they were, staying home even after a 5-7 season. I think you're right. Exactly. I think they know they need more depth. I think we would both agree you still probably can't go into next year with your linebacker D line room currently as it is, like sitting here on December 26th. But I still think they're going to. They're going to get some more bodies there. And like you said, the core of this team, obviously Lenore Sellers, but the 2 tackles, the 2 corners you just mentioned, the wide receivers, you feel pretty good about your running back room with Attaway, Howell, and Fuller going to be in there next year, right? I think the bones of this team are together for next year still, and that's still with a couple decisions we haven't heard about yet for the NFL draft. Someone's knocking on my door.
Okay, well, I'll pick up with what you said. So yeah, speaking of those NFL draft decisions, at the moment, Kyle Kennard is the only one that is fully opted out of the bowl game, definitely going to the NFL draft. Rocket Sanders has said he's going to the NFL draft. We aren't entirely sure on the opt out for the bowl game just because he hasn't formally announced it the way that Kyle Kennard did. We tend to assume he probably won't be playing in the bowl game, talking about Rocket Sanders.
Yep.
But we haven't got an official announcement there, and we're 5 days away from playing, so we'll see. And then, of course, Nick Emmanwori and TJ Sanders are your two other major questions there on the NFL draft. They have neither has fully come out and said one way or the other, but we were saying they're graded as first round picks on multiple draft boards and stuff. And if they truly end up with a first round grade whenever they go through the process, I think they would they should go, so they probably will go. If they somehow were to end up with a slightly less than that grade, then maybe a conversation comes around. But I tend to think Kennard, Rocket, Emmanwori, Sanders are probably your four major early uh, departures for the draft. Any other opt-outs that we should know about for the bowl game?
Actually, no. And this is, I think I'm a little bit surprised, but as far as whatever, we had a decent chunk of availability with players. I guess would have been last Friday, and Emmanwori, Sanders, Huntley, Tonka, TJ, Debo, all those guys said they're playing. And you're going to have probably besides Kennard, pretty much your entire starting defense available for this bowl game. Which D Knight, another one, said he's playing. That just doesn't happen in modern college football. So that's obviously huge. And then, yeah, I think the other question for the bowl game is, I agree with you. I'm under the assumption Rocket's not going to play. What does that do for your running back room? And we talk about you probably feel good about it going into next year, but this is a chance to see some depth. Some guys, Oscar Attaway take 15, 20 carries in a game. Whether that's trading off with Matthew Fuller or Jordan Howell, but doing it in somewhat of a high stakes environment, and getting to kind of see what they can do, assuming Rocket doesn't play, which we'll get 15 minutes of open practice tomorrow down there. So we'll see if he's out there and what the deal is.
Yeah, we'll definitely keep you in the loop there on GamecockScoop.com. The only other, well, you mentioned the opt-out thing. I actually think, and this is a good transition into us talking about the bowl game a little bit, for a non-playoff game, this is going to end up being a pretty good matchup between Illinois and South Carolina. And really, at the moment, Kyle Kennard's the only one that's officially opted out for South Carolina. Illinois will be missing their top wide receiver, who Pat Bryant. He's already said he's going to go to the draft. And then, yeah, maybe Rocket. But other than that, it sounds like pretty much both sides are going to have those starting cores. I think it's, both teams are in a similar spot where they have not reached that 10-win threshold in a while. And they're kind of looking for that 10th win because it means something to both these squads. And like you said, especially South Carolina with the veteran-laden defense, you have a lot of those guys that are trying to reach that mark for the only time in their careers before they head off into the sunset. So there's plenty of motivation, it seems, for this bowl game, which, if you've been paying attention the last few years, is not always a given when it comes to the postseason play.
Yeah, I even thinking about the Gator Bowl 2 years ago, which I still think South Carolina was pretty motivated for, but just the way that game went with, you were down to 2 tight ends or 1 or something like that. I think you had a offensive tackle playing tight end at one point, and your D-line was kind of banged up between the transfer portal and a couple opt-outs. You didn't have anywhere close to what you thought was your full team in that Gator Bowl 2 years ago, and Notre Dame didn't either. I mean, they had 2 pretty key guys. I think one offensive lineman and a tight end who went in the first round opt out. But no, not only are you going to have 2 pretty motivated teams, I think you're going to have 2 fan bases that want to travel. And South Carolina fans, we know, it's close. And I think Illinois fans are ready to be warm. And Orlando's a pretty good spot for that. So, yeah, it should be a good environment, a pretty good game. I know we'll probably get into it like X's and O's wise a little more before the game. But I like South Carolina in the matchup. I just think the line of scrimmage advantage is, even without Kennard, still pretty tilted to South Carolina in this game.
Yeah, I think you feel better about where you're at on both sides of the line, although Illinois' offensive line, it's a Brett Bielema team. So,
yeah, I was going to say, there's not a lot of mystery here. You kind of know what they're going to do.
Right. But honestly, the thing that, and we're going to post an article later today with Doug Buckshon, who runs the Illinois site in the Rivals Network, kind of breaking down what to expect from Illinois if you haven't watched them much this season. But he was saying kind of the difference between a mediocre Illinois team last year to an above average Illinois team this year is really Luke Altmaier and the passing attack kind of took a step forward in a major way. And they've won a bunch of really close games. They're 4-1 in one-score games this season. Here's a cherry pick stat for you that Buckshon pulled out that I don't even know how you determine this, but he was one of only 4 quarterbacks in the Power 4 with 4 20-plus yard touchdown passes and 5 or fewer interceptions. So that's a very specific stat. But I guess
Klubnik was one of the other ones too. You managed to turn
Yeah.
him over 3 times. So
exactly, yeah. So good at protecting the ball. Has some big playability, especially off the play action. But yeah, it doesn't. I don't know that you're going to see anything super scary offensively that you haven't seen so far this season. I do think they'll probably try to run it right at you a little, and maybe that's, I wouldn't call it a weakness of South Carolina's defense, but something, especially along the edges, that we did see a team like Missouri, a little bit of Clemson kind of take advantage of a little. But I mean, we're talking like a pretty elite performance from the defense throughout the year. So kind of splitting hairs there.
it's what we always talk about with the just yards aren't points, right? And Clemson moved the ball pretty well on you most of that game, but you bowed up a couple times and not quite in the red zone, but in scoring range. You forced 3 turnovers. You gave up 14 points, and that's kind of where the game is. I do think it's also worth noting Altmaier can move around a little bit. Like, he's pretty good with his legs. That's not something you haven't seen before. Obviously, you saw it with Klubnik. He had 2 rushing touchdowns in that game, and you've seen some running quarterbacks all year. But they've also been given some trouble by guys like that. So I think that's worth keeping an eye on as well when you're scouting Illinois.
Yeah, if I'm looking on the other side of the ball, they do have some defenders that have some individual. I mean, their defense is pretty good overall, but there's some individual defenders that have really stood out. Their outside linebacker, Gabe Jackus, is in the top 25 nationally in sacks. He had 8.0 this season, quite a few forced fumbles as well. And they kind of move him around the defense. So that is something offensively that whoever's calling the plays, be it Shula or Loggins or some combination of the two, needs to be aware of. And then, as they're calling their protections up front, that's someone that they're going to have to keep an eye on. And then defensive back Xavier Scott, all Big Ten first team. He plays that like nickel star position near the line of scrimmage. And he's really good against the run, but also he ended up with 4 interceptions this year. So he's another one that you can't really lose sight of. And really, overall, they were pretty solid on defense across the year.
Again, Brett Bielema team. They're going to be fundamentally sound. They're going to be tough to run the ball against. They're going to be disciplined. It feels like all the stuff we talked about when he was at Wisconsin and when he had it rolling in Arkansas there for a little bit, but this looks like a Brett Bielema team that you don't win 9 games by accident. I still think South Carolina is better, more talented, and managed to keep, the core of that talent and what they're going to need for this matchup intact through the opt-outs and the portal and everything else we talked about. But you're still going to have to play well to win this game. And I think you hit it right on the head with the turnovers. You got to avoid the big mistakes against this team, because I think we talked going into Clemson that straight up down to down, you were probably a little bit better as long as you didn't lose the turnover battle. I think it's kind of the same thing here, but maybe you can afford to lose it by 1. I think I don't even know how to say it. You're better than the gap between you and Illinois is bigger than the gap between you and Clemson, but you can't be -2, -3. I don't think the gap's that big. You can get away with that.
Yeah, and Vegas seems to agree with you. South Carolina Open is an 11.5-point favorite. That's moved a little bit, but still 9.5 points is what South Carolina has right now. I picked my picks. The Illinois guy picked his pick. They both, that's Doug Buckshon. I can use his name. But we both picked South Carolina to win. He obviously picked it by a slightly smaller margin. So
what did he say? I guess I'm spoiling the article now, but just curious.
Yeah, he said 34-27.
Okay.
South Carolina. But what South Carolina loses this game if, and I know you kind of hit on that a little bit, but fill us in. South Carolina loses this game if what goes wrong?
I think turnovers, like I said, and then I think it's if you become completely one-dimensional without Rocket Sanders, so if you're asking Lenore Sellers to throw the ball 40, 50 times in this game, I think that could be a problem just because I think Illinois has a pretty good secondary, and you already mentioned Xavier Scott. Um, I just don't think you can make a living that way against a pretty good defense. You need some balance. I expect him to still have it. I think Oscar Attaway can do a little bit in this game. You still have Sellers on design runs, although you probably don't want to be doing a lot of that in a bowl game. Just have him taking hits like that. But
Yeah.
I think that's the other thing for me besides the turnovers. Just you got to maintain some balance on offense, and it becomes especially harder if you don't end up having Rocket.
Something I'm really interested in for South Carolina defensively is how the pass rush looks without a Kyle Kennard, because that's going to be a little bit of a preview of next year. Obviously, you still have Dylan Stewart, who you feel like can create that pressure into next season as he spends another year in the weight room and all that too. But yeah, can you still piece together a pass rush? I mean, this is an exploitable Illinois offensive line. They gave up 31 sacks this season across 12 games. So what is that? Three-ish a game, 2.7 a game, something like that. So
Yeah.
is
Speaking
that
of that, we have. I'm trying to get it to load. I think we have some breaking news on the Illinois offensive line right now. One of their starters, Zy Chrysler, I guess that's how you say his name. He's started 30 games in his career, all 12 this year. Just entered the portal, according to multiple sources on my timeline right
well?
now. I don't know if he's still going to, I guess probably not play, but that's a guy who started all 12 games on that offensive line literally just now, like 2 minutes ago, going in the portal.
That that's really interesting.
See if I
So
can.
yeah, and even more like a line that was already kind of exploitable loses a starter. That'll be really interesting to see. I don't know if because they are so exploitable, I don't know how much it tells us about how that pass rush will fare next season against an SEC offensive line or something like that. But I still think it'll be kind of interesting to see how Dylan Stewart steps up. Do they start? We saw by the end of the season, Kyle Kennard's picking up a lot of double teams. Do they start to shift that towards Stewart? Do offensive lines play it a little bit more straight up, and maybe that gives him some different sorts of opportunities? I don't know. That'll be really interesting to see. Um, Speaking of Portal and playing in the game and stuff, one thing we didn't talk about, Robbie Ashford is opting out or is taking is joining the portal. Geez, why can't I think of words right now? But he's going to play in the bowl game, or he's going to be suited up, ready to go in if needed as a backup. I thought that was kind of an interesting story. Stream Beamer talked about it a little bit last week because thus far, if a player has entered the portal, that's kind of been like a don't let the door hit you on the way out sort of idea. And Ashford will become the first that enters the portal and plays in the bowl game. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, I thought that was interesting too. I actually wrote about it. If you go back probably about a week now on Gamecock Scoop, I guess we had Beamer last Wednesday. Um, yeah, so I think first of all, he said he took a vote with the group leaders. I don't know if that defines just all the seniors or all the guys who've been here all 5 years with him or 4 years or whatever, but said it was a player's choice. And I think it's twofold. I think it's one that, and this is something Beamer said, how good of a teammate Robbie Ashford's been, just how much the other guys in that room like him, have enjoyed working with him, have, appreciated him stepping in for Sellers a couple times in tough spots. And I think there's something to be said for doing things the right way. And then it's also what's the most fair thing for the rest of your football team? And almost always that's going to be not letting the guy with one foot out the door play or stick around. But I think in this case, when you're trying to win a bowl game and everything we talked about, what that would mean, a 10th win, all that, Lenore Sellers is one hit away from you needing Robbie Ashford to win this game. His helmet pops off in the wrong spot. You need Ashford for a play. Like, that's just
Right.
the way it is. Like, I think you're almost tying one arm behind your back if you went into this bowl game without your backup quarterback who's been good and done everything the right way all season, and clearly wanted to finish things out. And also, just one more thing, but Beamer said they talked about him entering the portal after the bowl game because he still wanted to be a part of this, but they just agreed that teams are going to fill their rosters out over the month of December, and that just wasn't the right thing for him to do if he's trying to be a starter somewhere else. So clearly well thought out, talked about on both sides. Other players besides Ashford took a vote, and that's kind of where it landed.
Now, to me, it was a nice little peek in this like culture and
Yeah.
family and like all these things that Beamer is constantly preaching and that we hear from recruits. Um, you know, sure, some of that's marketing or whatever, but I think this is a nice moment where we see everyone kind of trying to do right by each other at the same time and
Yeah.
it coming together in that way. Um, Man, I lost my train. Oh, one more thing for you to look for recruiting wise. The Under Armour All America game is next week on the second, first or second. It's around New Year's. Look for it. Donovan Murph is set to announce his decision there. That's the four-star wide receiver, the third four-star wide receiver in South Carolina that the Gamecocks were pretty heavy in on. Their main competition for most of this was also an in-state rival in Clemson. And my understanding from talking to some people in the Clemson sphere is that Clemson has backed off the recruitment. And I say that sarcastically, like, you should feel good if you're a South Carolina fan. That's all I'll say. We'll see what he actually announces here in about a week, but might get one more holiday surprise. How about that?
All right. That seems like a good note to end it on.
All right. Before we go, though, one more thing, because I hope we'll get back before the bowl game, but it's gonna be a busy week with you traveling, me traveling. Give me a quick score prediction, and then you can adjust it if we talk again.
Sure. I'm going to say 27-17 South Carolina.
That's pretty close to what I said. I said 30-21. So
Yeah.
right in. Neither of us has them quite covering, although very close. But
It's just now this offensive line news. That's their starting right guard. So
yeah,
that kind of changes how I look at this a little bit. But
yeah, might adjust their point total down a
yeah,
little bit. Yeah. But we'll have a lot more coverage of the bowl game in the next few days on GamecockScoop.com. Alan's headed down to Orlando, going to get all the little media periods we get for practice, the press conferences, all that sort of stuff. So we'll have full coverage on GamecockScoop.com. We'll try to get back here and talk about it a little bit on the podcast if we have time before the game. If not, either way, we'll talk to you soon. Have a happy holiday, happy new year, all those fun things. This has been the GamecockScoop.com podcast.